Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue on with our discussions of 1970s disaster movies. And I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on a film which is from 1979. And this is directed by Alvin Rakoff and written by Jack Hill and David P. Lewis and Céline Lafrenière. And it stars, among its really interesting cast, people like Barry Newman and Susan Clark and Shelley Winters and Leslie Nielsen and Ava Gardner, James Franciscus and Henry Fonda. This is the film which is called City on Fire. The plot or story conceit of this film, City on Fire, is that it involves a city, and the unique thing about this particular city is that due to certain administrative or municipal level decisions that could be described as being of a corrupt type of nature, perhaps, there was a choice to have a chemical works factory built and situated and thus working and be in operation within the heart of the particular city. So instead of a chemical works factory being, say, situated some distance away, it's in fact situated right in the heart of this particular city. And with that conceit of the environment, then what happens is, due to certain circumstances involving a particular disgruntled worker, there is an accident or there is cause for a huge fire conflagration to occur, and thus creating not just the risk of fire and damage and risk to human life with regard to this particular chemical works, but in fact this disaster of the fire spreads throughout the vicinity of the city. And so we have thus the name City on Fire. And in particular, there is, we understand, a hospital which is centralized in terms of its location, and thus it seems to be the center of operations in terms of the injured and trying to save as many lives as possible, of course, but also it is part of the operations of the film, because we understand that the fire or flames that are caused by this accident or mishap or sabotage or whatever that causes this huge fire in the first place, this reaches the hospital location. And so we understand that the hospital becomes a very significant place, not just in terms of saving lives, but also in terms of escaping the particular event, disaster event, which is spreading throughout the city. So this is, in essence, the concept behind the plot or story of City on Fire. Thus the title, which I think says it all in terms of this film, City on Fire. So the film is a very interesting one, because I think while it's not, say, the best or my most absolute favorite disaster film that I've ever seen, still I think there are a lot of strengths about the film that make it a very entertaining and quite thrilling watch indeed, as I say, in the context of the disaster genre. So first of all, we're dealing with this huge concept of the disaster and its far-reaching effects. It's not just a disaster located in one, say, building or one enclosed situation. This is a disaster that's wide-reaching. It's affecting an entire city. And it's affecting streets and buildings and the outdoors as well as the indoors. And so there is no place where one can go and one can be safe except as far away from the city as possible, apparently. And so that makes the disaster element perhaps very, very big indeed. Now, perhaps one of the criticisms that could be said about this film is maybe it's hard for a viewer to get a real grasp as to the specific geography of the place, because if it's hard to get a grasp on that, it's therefore hard to understand exactly what the physics are, so to speak, the cinematic physics are with regard to how the fire is spreading, where the particular locations are, where they are located vis-a-vis each other. And this is true especially because there are different locations that we encounter along the way, not just one location of the works or the hospital, but there are other places in the city that we go to with specific scenes. And so sometimes it might be difficult to keep track of everything. Thus, it might be difficult to understand exactly the cinematic physics of how the fire works. However, in that department, I think the film does a good job, or as good a job as it can, maybe. And also there is this conceit of the character of Henry Fonda, and there's this room of operations, as it were, emergency operations. And so I think that is a way that we can get a sense as to the geography of the place. Does that work all the time? Again, that will be up to you as the viewer to determine. But I think the film does a good job, or tries its best, to establish the geography by virtue of using, say the operations room of the Henry Fonda character, and also using the primary locations of, say, the hospital and other places. So, but that's another way to say that this is a very wide-reaching disaster, very far-reaching, and it's very almost amorphous in terms of its effects. So, in that way, too, perhaps that could be another way to describe as to the danger of this, because it could in effect reach virtually any place in the city. At least that's what one can believe. And so it could just happen quite suddenly. It could happen in a particular neighborhood or residential area quite suddenly. And indeed, we get certain scenes of that happening. And so in that way, maybe it could be said that the disaster element does have a certain level of unexpected terror. And indeed, that is augmented by the fact that the fire scenes here are they have a very sinister and horrifying edge to them. There is a sense not just of panic, but of the real horror of the engulfing nature of the flames and the violence and the real damage that they can cause. And so there's almost a terrifying, slightly horror film element to it, and the way that the film captures the fire. It's almost like the fire is a monster that is attacking, which is, I think, a very interesting way to view it. So that is, I would say, one of its other strengths. Another strength, too, is the characterizations and the performances that are behind those characterizations. Now, the cast is a very interesting one, I think, and the cast each of the cast members portrays a particular character, of course, obviously, right? But they all have their own little backstories, and they have their intersections between and among each other. There's maybe some romantic involvement hinted at, or actually directly discussed in the film among certain characters. Some characters like each other, some characters don't. Maybe there's a particular character that is, in fact, the cause of this disaster more than we might realize, or more than the characters here might realize. And so there's a lot of that drama intrigue that is set into this film, which is very much part of the disaster film genre mold, as we have seen in past examples. And we see these performers that are quite famous, and they do, I think, a very good job and an earnest attempt at handling this particular material. And so there is still a sense of seriousness that they give, even when things become so over the top, so outrageous in terms of the total engulfment of this particular area by this monstrous fire that occurs due to these certain circumstances. So the performances are really strong. And speaking of those performances and the characters, what I also like is that there is a sense of mystery. Sometimes the characters have the information, but other times we realize maybe they don't have all the information. Maybe we have more information as viewers than the characters do as to what actually happened with this particular fire. So there is that interesting divide, and I think that makes for a kind of a not necessarily interactive viewing per se, but there is this way in which we as viewers can participate in the scenes that we are watching, and we having more information than, say, the characters in the particular scene. Maybe we feel a sense of suspense, or that kind of emotion is engendered. So that, I think, is a very strong cinematic technique. Another one is the characters themselves. They go through various arcs in the film. Some characters are quite likable. Others are designed to be very unlikable and almost villainous. But even those darker characters, or those more villain-type characters, they themselves have various arcs which come through almost in a heroic fashion. In other words, for the most part, generally speaking, the characters that we see in this film, even though they might have different backgrounds, and even though they might be on different levels of villainy, some are more antagonistic, some are more of the protagonist camp, as it were. Even if that's the case at the outset of the film, when the disaster strikes, we see the characters react, and they're trying to help each other, and so it's like they don't have those, they don't let their past stories of drama get in the way of what they understand to be the ultimate priorities of how to act in a particular disaster. In other words, even the most, say, even the more maybe despisable characters in the film, for the most part, tend to act in a very heroic way in certain aspects of the film as the disaster is on set. And so I like that aspect. I like how we have this almost teamwork effort. And even though there is a little bit of tension among the characters and their personalities, still there's this type of teamwork effort that is on display for the most part. And I really appreciate how those various character arcs are developed over time. As I say, how they react to this particular set of disasters involving this monstrous engulfment and fire and flames. So that is an interesting technique in terms of character arc development, which I think is worth applauding. That's one of the strengths of the film. It is I think a very, maybe it's a low budget film, and it's using the most, I think, of its locations. I understand it was shot in terms of its, let's say, exteriors and the city locations in Montreal, Canada. And I think it makes use of those exterior locations very well, because it has the city has a really distinct, nice look to it. And that, I think, also provides of course, the setting for the aforementioned city on fire aspect of the film. And so I think it does the best with the location shooting and the sets and, as I say, the characters and the concept of the fire. Is it the strongest film in this department, in this genre? For me, probably not, because, as I say, there are some aspects that maybe seem a little bit outrageous, or maybe they seem a little bit hard for me to comprehend in terms of the geography and the physics of the fire itself, the disaster element itself. But still, even with those points, I still find myself, as I say, thrilled and entertained by the concept and how it's applied and how the characters react in these situations. And it's always nice to see a lot of these performers that we have seen in past disaster films. Henry Fonda, for example, Leslie Nielsen, Shelley Winters, of course, Ava Gardner, James Franciscus, Susan Clark, and others, and Barry Newman, of course. And so I think it's a great ensemble for an entertaining disaster film from this era. This is City on Fire. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.